Okay, so here we are looking at an above view or superior view of the spinal cord. So we're looking down at the spinal cord. So review your spinal cord anatomy so that you know what we're talking about. I'll give it a quick review also here to help you out. So we have our horns in here. That would be the dark matter where we have cell bodies. What we're interested more in would be the columns here for right now. The columns have axons, so we're going to be dealing with upper motor neuron axons. So they're going to be coming down along the anterior column here, or the lateral column, because we know that motor is all going on in the front. We know the roots, so we have the dorsal root. I put the dorsal root ganglion. We know that's all sensory going in. And we know the ventral root in the front, which is motor going out. Now what we have not seen before are these things, these little bridges here. This one, this one, this one, and this one. So 4 little bridges. All of them have a name that involves the word ramus. And the word ramus means bridge. So the dorsal ramus is the bridge to the back. The ventral ramus is the bridge to the front. And then here, where I have the names written over here, the white ramus and the gray ramus. For these two, think of what you know about white matter and gray matter. White matter refers to myelinated axons. So we'll have myelinated axons here. In the gray ramus, that would be unmyelinated axons, so it would appear grayer in color. Together, the white ramus and the gray ramus are called the rami communicantes, which means communicating bridge, or a bridge that communicates. And what it's communicating is the ventral root of the spinal cord with the sympathetic chain ganglion. So those sympathetic chain ganglia are the ones that we saw on either side of the spinal cord in our previous video. So this is how we get those upper motor neurons to the sympathetic chain ganglia. Through the ventral root, down through the white ramus, and now we're in the sympathetic chain ganglia. So depending on the final destination of what we're trying to innervate, where we're trying to stimulate or inhibit with the sympathetic nervous system, these axons that are coming out from the upper motor neurons, so going out through the ventral root, down through the white ramus, they might synapse with a lower motor neuron in the sympathetic chain ganglion. That's an option. And then that lower motor neuron would go back up here through the gray ramus, back out into the spinal nerve, and then either through the dorsal ramus or the ventral ramus. But that would just be dealing with things that are going to your head and your back, or to your body wall, or to the limbs. When we're trying to innervate, let's say the celiac ganglion, so your stomach, or your superior mesenteric ganglion, like intestines, or inferior mesenteric ganglion, also intestines, or any of the terminal ganglia, with cardiac plexus, pulmonary plexus, renal plexus, inferior hypogastric plexus. We're not going to stop at the sympathetic chain ganglion. Our upper motor neuron is going to continue on and just pass right through that sympathetic chain ganglion and out through a nerve. Now here I've done the splanchnic nerve going to a collateral ganglion, just as an example. This could also be, say, a sympathetic nerve going to the cardiac plexus, or the renal, or I'm sorry, the pulmonary plexus. Or it could be another splanchnic nerve going to the renal plexus or the inferior hypogastric plexus. So I just chose to use one splanchnic nerve. Let's say it's the greater splanchnic nerve, and this would be the celiac ganglion, okay, which would be the topmost of the splanchnic nerves and the topmost of the collateral ganglia. Okay, so let's just draw this out. I'm going to draw, just using this pen, just the axon for the upper motor neuron, and let's say we're going to the stomach. So we're going to make this the celiac ganglion, and this would be the greater splanchnic nerve. So here comes the axon for the upper motor neuron. It goes down through the white ramus, passes right through the sympathetic chain ganglion, out through that greater splanchnic nerve, and then it will stop when it gets into the celiac ganglion, where we'll find the lower motor neuron, along with a lot of other lower motor neurons, and that will go out towards your stomach. Okay, so that's one possible pathway. Now let's do another pathway. Let's say we're trying to innervate something in your head or your back. So here's our final destination. here comes that upper motor neuron axon. It goes out through the ventral root. That's going to be the same for all the pathways. Down through the white ramus, and now it's going to synapse with a lower motor neuron in the sympathetic chain ganglion. So we're done now with the upper motor neuron in that pathway. Now, from there, the lower motor neuron is going to go up through the gray ramus, back onto the ventral root, into the spinal nerve, and then up the dorsal ramus to your head or your back. We can do the same thing, last thing to do for the body wall or the limbs. Upper motor neuron axon goes out through the ventral root, down through the white ramus, meets up with its lower motor neuron in the sympathetic chain ganglion. Now we're dealing with the axon for the lower motor neuron. That goes up through the gray ramus, back onto the ventral root. We're going to cross them. It goes through the spinal nerve and then out through the ventral ramus to the body wall or the limbs. So in your notes, in your PowerPoints, you'll see a chart that lists all of this information out. And that might be the easiest way to study it. It just goes by destination. And that would be how it would be asked on a test. So let's say I asked, we want to follow the track for something that goes to the head or the back. So you would take your upper motor neuron going out through the ventral root, down through the white ramus, meets up with the lower motor neuron in the sympathetic chain ganglion. Then the axon for the lower motor neuron goes up through the gray ramus, out again to the spinal cord, and finally to the dorsal ramus. So it's just giving a list of the steps that we take. Same thing, let's just do this one again. Let's say this is the greater splanchnic nerve here, and this would be the celiac ganglion like we used in our example. So the upper motor neuron goes out through the ventral root, down through the white ramus, keeps on going right through the sympathetic chain ganglion, out through the greater splanchnic nerve. Finally it gets to the celiac ganglion where it synapses with the lower motor neuron. Then the lower motor neuron goes out towards the stomach. That would be if that was the celiac ganglion. It could be the superior mesenteric ganglion, the inferior mesenteric ganglion, any one of those collateral ganglia. Okay, so those pathways are probably the most dense part of this entire unit. So spend a lot of time studying those pathways, and then our next video will be about vision.